We should talk a little bit about the impact the war itself is having on Britain. I mean, we've had, UK sovereign airbase has been attacked, but also we're being drawn in via the kind of energy shock that is taking place. So one of Qatar's biggest terminals for liquefied natural gas has been hit. Some depots in Saudi Arabia have been hit. The Strait of Hormuz, where most of the world's oil travels through, has been effectively closed by the strikes. And we've seen domestic gas prices shoot up by 100%. It's unprecedented. Tom, it feels like we're just completely, almost uniquely ill-equipped to deal with these kinds of global situations. And, it was only 4 years ago when Ukraine was invaded and the gas price went through the roof. And it's as if our government or governing class has learned nothing from that.
No, exactly. I think they really want the sort of holiday from history to continue, and they're really clinging on to it. And I thought it was really interesting in the reporting that's happened in the past 24 hours about whether or not what the sequence of events was in terms of Starmer finally relenting and allowing the Americans to use Diego Garcia and Fairford for the strikes, was that Ed Miliband was first and foremost pushing against these actions, not just because he was opposed to it on a sort of ideological basis, but also because he was worried about energy prices. If he was worried about energy prices, he might have not been trying to, shut down North Sea oil. If he was worried about energy prices, he wouldn't be pursuing all of his net zero policies, which he knows and has been told have the potential to cause blackouts, and he's continuing down that merry road anyway. There's just a fundamental lack of seriousness, a lack of recognition that you might have been able to play around with these sort of luxury beliefs, luxury policies, if you like, at a time of relative geopolitical stability and relative prosperity. But now, surely there has to be an adjustment. And I thought it was so interesting with the Spring Statement this week, a government that, first of all, wasn't so weak in relation to the markets and also just weak politically, and also a government that had a fair amount more vision. That would have been an opportunity to say, we need to do things very differently in relation to defence and also in relation to energy. Here is the plan which is going to, as much as is humanly possible, cushion the blow of these global shocks that we're now going to experience, and also to ensure that we're sufficiently fortified for what is increasingly, quite clearly, a much more dangerous world. The fact that we've got none of that, I thought, is everything you need to know, not just about this government, but I think about the kind of broader governing class through the political parties and the civil service, and just how they really desperately want it to still be the late 1990s, and it's not anymore, and they can't quite get to grips with that.
I was amused to see that, in relation to the Spring Statement, that the OBR has actually produced some forecasts, which will have been out of date by the time they were read by Rachel Reeves. So you just think, what was on earth was the point of that exercise? Miriam, what have you?
Well, yeah, absolutely. The problem is we have these now deeply, deeply entrenched problems. Underinvestment in defence, that's been plain to see this week. Not having a single ship in the region, most of them being in dock, being fixed up. A very, very fragile economy that's teetering on the edge of just having too much debt, and then complete dependence in terms of energy. But the trouble with all these problems is they will take a long time to fix.
Yeah.
And there will be pain before there's gain.
Yeah.
And all of the problems will outlive 1, 2, 3, 4 governments. So where's the incentive in our current democratic system for politicians to make the really, really hard decisions? Because, my view is basically we've got to scrap the welfare state. We've got to start again. I'm not saying no welfare ever, but we have got to scrap our welfare state because it is the one thing that's stopping us spending money on the thing that the state needs to spend money on: defence, energy, infrastructure. But how could any government right now implement that? It's not, Starmer's not going to survive 3 years probably. His government might survive 3 years, but then they're out. So they're not going to see any benefit from any reform in terms of long term.
Was it 400 billion welfare spending is going to hit at the end of this parliament?
Exactly. And our current defence budget is 62 billion a year. It's not, you cannot increase the defence budget if you're not willing to do anything about welfare. Our debt interest payments are 117 billion a year. This, the order of the amount of money that we are spending now, that we're committed to spending on things that are nothing to do with growth, nothing to do with protecting the state, and that in the past were the responsibility of individuals and families to provide for people, to look after people when they're sick. But how can any government now in our current system, which is a 5-year cycle at best, change those things? I just think we've reached an impasse. I just don't know how we get out of here.
I did see a Labour MP pipe up to say there's no point in, drilling in the North Sea because it might take 5 years for a new well to come online. And you think, well, I'm planning to be alive in 5 years' time, so it is relevant.
But he's not
relevant.
Expected to be in Parliament, and I think that's the difference. Where you look back, in previous a long time ago, like Napoleonic Wars. I mean, I think it took 10 years to build the navy that Nelson eventually used to defeat Napoleon's fleet. But we just don't operate on those kind of time cycles anymore. And so it's very difficult to see how those kind of structural things will be achieved. I visited Hungary in January, mainly to look at their immigration successes. But I think what you see there with a prime minister who's been in power for 16 years. Now, of course, Orban comes with all sorts of controversies and everything like that. But what can be achieved with a stable government of 16 years, with a government that does actually have a vision, knows what it stands for and what it wants to achieve, that was quite remarkable. But you think, how many prime ministers have we had since 2016? Are we on our 7th? I don't know. I mean, how do you achieve anything like that?
I think that instability is at least in part generated by the lack of leadership and the lack of substance from the top as well. The reason that we've had so many politicians, political parties, prime ministers come and go is because they have been quite unserious. They have been chasing the news agenda. I do think that, because often this can come across as if the problem is the public have gotten used to X, Y, Z, and they're not going to take this well. You won't win an election, and obviously that's clearly the case in many instances. But I do think people can be reasoned with. I do think people respond to statesmanship and leadership, and someone who is willing to kind of lay out what the stakes are. You can at least start to build a sort of consensus or build a sort of argument in the country for measures which we, otherwise wouldn't want to take, but we're in a changing world and have to take them. There's just no one that's obviously capable of making that argument. It's particularly difficult in an era of multi-party politics, of course, where everything is so fractious, and it's very difficult. It seems inconceivable that we'll have a political party in any time soon kind of edging towards 40% of the vote, the kind of mandate that you would need to properly reshape things and do things that are quite drastic. But I do think that as much as we wouldn't, it would be best not to start from here. We do have to start from here, and it would be good if some politicians and even people in the background, in the kind of state apparatus, emerged of significantly more substance than we had previously, who are willing to actually make the case and therefore take the country with them on some of these very, very difficult and unpopular decisions that might need to be made.